Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we will review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Shabbat, pages 128 through 134. Kuf Chaf Chet, 128. The Mishnah tells us, Mechalalin alea et Shabbat, for the sake of a woman who just gave birth, for a yoledet, we can profane the Sabbath, we can violate the Sabbath law. The Gemara wants to know in what fashion. It says, Im haytatzri chalaner, if the woman needed a candle, her friend may light the candle for her. So to this the Gemara says, Pshita, it's obvious. If the Mishnah had said that, more generally speaking, we're allowed to violate the Sabbath for the Yoledet, then why would you think that you could not light a candle? Of course you could light a candle. To this the Gemara responds, Lo tzricha, it's a particular case where you might have thought otherwise. Besuma, the woman who gave birth is blind, and she's not going to directly benefit from the light of the candle. Mahu detema, what might you have thought? Kevin lo chazia asur, since she cannot see, it should be forbidden. Kamash malan, therefore we are told, that nonetheless, even for the blind woman who just gave birth, the lighting of a candle provides her some satisfaction, some peace of mind, some comfort, in the sense that, svara, she will think to herself, if I have any need that comes about, because the candle is providing illumination, my friend will see that I have this need and she will help me. 129. Here the Gemara gives us good advice. A person should sell the beams of his house in order to provide shoes for his feet. That in Talmudic thought, having footwear, having foot gear is very important. Don't go without shoes. It's not good for you. Nonetheless, hikizdam, if you did a bloodletting procedure, ve'en lo mayochal, and you have nothing to eat afterwards, that you should even sell the shoes off of your feet in order to provide money to buy food for a meal. That eating after bloodletting is so important that even is more important than having shoes on your feet. What is the meal after the bloodletting ritual? So here there's a machloket. Rav says it means to have meat, and Shmuel says it means to have wine. What's the logic of having meat? That one becomes anemic after some bloodletting, and therefore you have to have some cholesterol, some protein provided by the meat. 130, Kuf Lamed. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that any mitzvah which our people, our ancestors, were so devoted to, even in the time of religious persecution, the Shat Hashmad, if in that moment, when they could lose their life for performing a mitzvah, nonetheless they did so, then that particular mitzvah will remain firm in the hands of the Jewish people for generations to come. What examples fall into that category? Kigon avodat kochavim, abstaining from idolatry, umila, and circumcision. And so, for many generations thereafter, the Jewish people were devoted to the cause of monotheism and not reverting to idolatry, and observed the rite of Brit Milah. And this we know is true, that even in modern times, when the vast bulk of the Jewish population is not scrupulously shomer mitzvah observant, nonetheless it is overwhelmingly true that Jews will give their boys Brit Milah. However, any mitzvah which our ancestors did not hold on to firmly when there was an hour of persecution, then even to this very day, our observance of that mitzvah is weak and in danger of being lost. What example is given in the Talmud? Kigon tefillin, wearing phylacteries, wearing tefillin every day. It is sadly true that the vast bulk of the Jewish population today does not wear tefillin on a daily basis. 131, Kuf Lamed Aleph. The Torah says concerning Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah Yelachem, it shall be a day of sounding of the shofar. To this the Gemara says, Bayom afilu b'Shabbat, at any day of the week, even on the Sabbath. Ulamai, to this the Gemara says, well, why would we think you could not do it? Ilema l'tekiya, if you might have thought that blowing the shofar is off limits on Shabbat, well, kol melechet avodah lo tasu. The Torah says that on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do malacha. However, tekiyat shofar, the sounding of the shofar, is not a malacha. It is only a chachma. It is an act of wisdom, a skill. To blow a shofar, like to blow any musical instrument, is a skill set, but it's not a prohibited labor. So since the Torah could not be saying that you could do this act of blowing because you might have thought it's forbidden on account of malacha, since it's not a malacha. What was the Torah actually teaching us? To this, Rabbi Eliezer would say it was teaching machshirin, that you were allowed to, on the holiday, do the preparatory acts of preparing the shofar, of fashioning the shofar, so that you might be able to blow it. To this, the rabbis respond, no, they do not allow machshirin, but rather they would say Yom Teruah Lachem means Bayom V'lo Balayla, that the sounding of the shofar happens on the day of Rosh Hashanah, Bayom in the daylight hours, V'lo Balayla, and not in the nighttime. 132. The Gemara asks, how do we know Minayin lepikuach nefesh shedochet Shabbat? How do you know that this preservation of life, saving of a life in an emergency situation, overrides the Sabbath law? In truth, the Talmud was not really questioning whether this is true. It was simply looking for a scriptural source to justify what they knew to be true. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, Ma mila shiachat me'evarav shladam dochet Shabbat. Well, there's a logical assumption in play here. If circumcision, which involves a mitzvah on only one limb of the body, and yet that overrides the Sabbath, kal v'chomer lepikuach nefesh dochet Shabbat, then all the more so shall preservation of life, which will allow the person who survives and is saved to observe further Shabbatot, in which they will use their many limbs of the body in the observance of mitzvot, all the more so that should be permitted. 133. Where it tells us, Yom Tov eina docha ela bizmana bilvad, that circumcision will only override Yom Tov when done on the 8th day. But that if the Brit Milah was delayed for whatever reason, whether for reasons of health or negligence, whatever it might be, the Brit Milah cannot take place on Yom Tov on the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th day or thereafter. But rather, once it is no longer the 8th day, if it's from the 9th day and beyond, the Brit Milah must take place on a Yom Chol, on a mundane day. How do we know this to be true? Well, the Torah says regarding Yom Tov that you can perform malacha for the sake of ochel nefesh, food. And the Torah says, Hu levado ye'aseh lachem, this alone you shall do for yourselves. Levado, this alone, the Gemara means to say, velo milah shelo bizmana, that food preparation, yes, but not circumcision in the incorrect time. 134. The Mishnah teaches us, that you're allowed to bathe the baby on the 3rd day after the circumcision in hot water, even though it's the Sabbath, meaning you can boil hot water and give the baby the bath on that 3rd day because it is dangerous for the baby not to be bathed. Shene'emar, and a verse is quoted from the Torah, and it was on the 3rd day, when they were ailing. This is a reference to the story of Shechem, and that Shimon and Levi came and slaughtered all the people of Shechem after the episode with Dinah. And the menfolk of Shechem had given themselves circumcision, and they were weak and vulnerable on the 3rd day. So from the fact that they were weak and vulnerable on the 3rd day, it means that a person is in danger and needs to have medicinal treatment, or at least a bath in hot water on that day. The Gemara quotes a Braita, which has the same halacha and quotes the same biblical verse, but acknowledges that the biblical verse is not a true proof, but rather is a zecher ba'alma, is a scriptural illusion, but not a compelling proof. To which the Gemara wants to know, why is it not a compelling proof? After all, if the Torah says that the people of Shechem were in danger on the 3rd day, then a baby would seem to be in danger on the 3rd day after a bris, absent some act of healing, like a hot bath. To this, the Gemara says, Mishum de gadolo selek bisrahaya, katan selek bisrahaya, that an adult will not recover so easily, and therefore on the 3rd day the adult is vulnerable. Whereas a baby recovers quickly from the surgery, and so maybe the baby is not vulnerable. To this, the Braita says, no, the baby is vulnerable, and therefore give the baby a bath.